Hello, Lisa. I'm so thrilled to be interviewing Lisa Rice, who I've known for many years. She's a leader in the democracy reform, healthy self governance movement. She's been a strategist and a passionate for political reform for as long as I've known her. She's active in the movement to raise the voice of independent voters. She's on the board of directors of Unite America and has, I believe, a master's degree from MIT Sloan School. And I could go on, but we don't have that much time. So I want the City Biz audience to learn what I've learned over the years personally by interacting with Lisa. Hi, Lisa. How are you today?
Hey, David. I'm good. I'm well. It's good to see you.
Good to see you
We're
as well.
competing with you for hot weather here in DC today.
Yeah, well, I just returned from DC for an interesting event, but that's a story for another time. I believe we first met related to your work with Unite America and something related to their philosophy about our political system being controlled by Democrats and Republicans and people outside of that not having a voice. Could you speak a little to that work and how that has evolved over the years and what you're doing in that respect?
Sure. I'm not sure exactly when we met, but when I joined Unite America in 2017 as an advisor, and then later that year as a board member, we were the Centrist Project. And our goal at that time was to get 3 to 5 independent senators elected, and they would form a fulcrum. So we were working towards something called the Fulcrum strategy. And because the Senate is so close in Republican Democrat control, and I don't even remember what the numbers were in 2016 or 18. I don't remember. They were so close, and it's always been, for the last 10 years, razor close. So the driving force behind that, or the philosophy, was if you could get 3 to 5 independent thinkers in the Senate, they would, in fact, form a fulcrum that would draw people into conversation, negotiation, and maybe a Senate that was functioning for the people again. What we found was that it was very, very difficult to elect someone to the Senate that is labeled as an independent. It really is very difficult for someone in statewide office to gain a senatorial seat. So we refocused and took a really hard look at what are we really trying to do, and was the Fulcrum strategy the only way to achieve that? No, what we wanted to do is have a functioning federal government at the senatorial level, especially the House as well. But we were really focused on the Senate. And so what we need and what we thought about is, well, what do we need? We need people who are in those seats who are independent thinkers or who have incentive to vote with the majority of their constituents versus a minority of people who in many times are the ones that send them to office. And so what we did was really look at those incentives. What are those incentives that drive politicians to behave the way they do? And we looked at the data and found that, and we started looking at this really closely in 2018, 2020. What we saw in 2020 and again in 2022, David, is about 83% of U.S. House seats are in what we refer to as safe districts. In other words, both sides of the aisle make up 83% on both 83% of House seats on both sides of the aisle. Those winners are determined in the primary, right? So that means that the small percentage of people who are voting in those elections, those primary elections, are the ones that are sending these folks to the House. And so that's who those elected officials work for. And in 2020, I believe it was about 11, on average, about 11% of people participated in primaries. So 11% of people electing 85% of
Oh
people.
my! So related to all that, I mean that.
And it's gone to, and it went down in 2022. In 2022, it was hovering around 8%. And right now, as we're tracking in 2024, it's hovering at that 8, 9, 10% level. So we had to look at, what changes the incentive. People aren't, the majority of people are not sending folks to the House and Senate. It's a minority. We
Well,
want
I know
them
you
more.
have some specific solutions, you and through Unite America and other organizations. Do you want to? There's something called ranked choice voting. Is that one of the solutions potentially to this
Ranked
problem?
choice, ranked choice voting is a tool to ensure that people who are elected are backed by a majority of electors. And that's one form of instant runoff. Nonpartisan primaries are another tool. Independent redistricting is another tool. These are all tools to widen access and put voters first. And so these are things, they're party neutral reforms. They improve representation, increase accountability, and as I said, put voters first. One of our wins actually came by accident, tragic accident, really. The pandemic forced all of us to stay at home. And so we had something on our roadmap that a lot of people weren't following called vote from home, right? Vote by mail. Well, guess what? All of a sudden in 2020, everybody wanted it, right? So that was something that we had on our roadmap
Right.
back in 2018. And it was going to be a long haul. But then, unfortunately for humanity, the pandemic struck, but we were able to really advance that, just by leaps and bounds because of
Sure.
those circumstances.
Well,
So
you
that
just
actually is off our list now,
yeah.
right?
Okay. Well, you just used the term long haul, and I
Yes.
have a question because I'm challenged with this these days. I've been working in the democracy reform bridging movement for 15 years now, and I've always thought in terms of the long term. But I'm
Yes.
curious, given the current situation, the high level of partisanship and divide in our nation, and given this major election we have coming up in November, has anything changed in either your philosophy or the organizations you work with in terms of doing something in the next 6 to 12 months? In other words, modifying any of the long-term strategies, or you're pretty much, or doing both? Or I'm just curious, has anything changed as a result of the election coming up?
Well, not necessarily a result of the election coming up. It's we're focused on every cycle coming up. So we identified the primary problem a couple of years ago, and we've been working toward the primary solution. And our executive director, Unite America's executive director, has published a book this year, and it's called The Primary Solution, and it talks about how to solve that primary problem. And the solution is to open up primaries, and people are trying to do that in different ways in different parts of the country, including me here in DC. But we can talk about that later.
Well, I want to talk about DC because I know it's difficult. We all have limited amount of time, and I know you're working on these national democracy reform problems. But I know you're an active participant in your community in Washington D.C. Could you tell me a little about some of the things you have or are working on in D.C.?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So here locally, I am the proposer of an initiative to open our primaries to independent voters. 1 in 6 DC voters are registered as non-affiliated voters. So we're working on a dual part initiative. The second part of the initiative is to drive accountability, make these politicians work for our vote, and that would be via ranked choice voting, implementing that in our primaries and in the general. And not unlike the 83% of House seats in DC, we are governed by a supermajority of the Democratic Party. So the primary is the election that matters. And 73,000 of us, and I say us because I am one of your neighbors. If you're watching from Washington, D.C., I'm one of your neighbors that's an independent and was shut out of our June 4th primaries. So it's personal for me, David.
Yes. Well, as you well know, that the Bridge Alliance, which I co-founded, we have many organizations working on democracy reform, but we also have many organizations working on the cultural divide that's separating us. Do you have any thoughts as to solutions to that, or what's happening in our nation in terms of this cultural stress that, I mean, ultimately, if we're going to succeed as a nation, we have to realize that we are diverse in race and ethnic and in age. So any thoughts on how we might mitigate that cultural divide and bring us together as a nation and live into the dream that's never been realized?
Well, I have many thoughts.
I thought you might.
So here's what I'm going to start with, and I'll start with what I talk to people here locally when I talk about reforms, and when I talk to folks who are volunteering with our campaign. One of the things I think we need to do is listen more than we speak. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them appropriately. We are so locked into, and this is potentially all of us, many of us are so locked into our echo chambers, and we've gotten away from affiliating with or associating with or even socializing with people who think and act and look differently than us, that we have lost the ability to have a conversation, disagree, and remain civil. And so now, if we were to listen to the news, and all of us, when I was a kid, and now I'm going to do one of those back in the day kind of things, we all looked at the same 3 networks. We all got our news from the same place. That model is gone. And today, unless we make a concerted effort to listen to and learn from people who think differently than us, we only hear the same thing that we say parroted back at us. And so it's really incumbent upon those of us who want to bring about change to make the time and take the effort to listen to people and listen to why they're frustrated, and listen to why they're disheartened, and listen to why they're angry. And I'm going to tell you, it's not always easy. And here in DC with this campaign, I've had grown men stand in my face and yell at me. I'm like, why are you yelling? I'm right here. They're so impassioned. They're so impassioned about the point they want to make, and so convinced that because I hold a different opinion, that I want to argue with them, that they don't want to give me a chance to have the conversation. And so what I do is say, well, tell me about it. Tell me why you hold that position. And it really leads to interesting conversations. And I think we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to listen. We need to be able to take it in. We have to be able to conduct ourselves in a polite fashion. We have to be able to listen. We have to be able to withstand silence. We have gotten so used to everything being at such a rapid cadence that we become uncomfortable with silence. And the silence shows whomever I'm talking to that I'm actually listening to them.
Interesting. So someone in a City Biz audience is listening and they've never done anything in politics or social change, and what you're saying makes sense to them, but they don't know what to do. I mean, how does a regular person, whether they're a teacher, a young adult, a student, a businessman, what many of them say to me, there's nothing I can do. Do you have any words of wisdom of where to start, how to become involved, what to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the first thing I say is register to vote. If you think you're registered to vote, but maybe haven't voted in the last election, do yourself the favor of checking with your Board of Elections to make sure you're still an active voter. Different places have different guidelines for pulling people off of the registration, and some might be as recent as if you haven't participated in the last 2 years or 4 years. So make sure you're registered to vote, and then think about issues that matter to you and take a look at who's running for those offices that really matter to you. I talk to a lot of college students, and time and again they say, "I'm not voting. These people don't represent me." And my answer to that is, I understand you feel that way, but they're in office and they do in fact represent you, whether or not you feel that way. And they want to do something. They want to vote for positions that matter. So what I say to everyone is what I say first of all: if you're in a place where you can vote for Secretary of State, judges, or sheriff, find out who's running, find out what their policies are, their position statements, and vote for them. Those are very consequential offices in our democracy and have an impact that we often don't realize until those people are in office. The next thing, especially when I'm talking to students, is don't forget to vote if you're at home. And a lot, in DC, we have a lot of people who are away from home. If you need to go back home to vote, if that's the only way you can vote, do it. If you need a mail-in ballot, absentee ballot, get it. The most important thing to do is vote. And I always, always end with local elections matter. It's not just the presidency. It's all of those down ballot things. It's your local, it's the school board. Things are happening in school boards, David. People are banning books and they're doing it at the school board. And it's
Yes, they
people who
are.
have been elected to the school board.
Sure. So if there's just something in your personal life, it doesn't have to be big politics and issues you don't understand, but, it starts at a community level and become involved.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And many people don't realize if they have, so in DC, we don't have a sheriff, but in the suburbs here, a lot of the counties, surrounding counties have sheriffs, and every single one of those sheriffs has to run for office. The sheriff is the person who implements the public policy, the law enforcement officer. And I don't think there's a person who doesn't recognize that law enforcement is very impactful on our lives.
So is.
And so that's, again, sheriff, judges, Secretary of State.
Yeah. I'm going to switch to a little personal question here. We don't have that much time left, but I'm just curious. When you were growing up, did you have any sense when you were in high school or early on in college that your life would lead you in this direction of being politically involved? Or did you have another goal in life and this just happened? Or has it always been a dream of yours?
Look, I'll be completely honest. In terms of being in this kind of leadership, this kind of role, this kind of organization, no. Certainly not in high school. But I will say that my parents, like most working class and middle class Black parents, took me to voter registration, took me to the polls on voting day. That was an occasion, to go with my parents when they voted. And so as far as participation in our government, I've been a participant or on the sidelines since I was very young. So I always had a sense that one had to be an active participant in this democracy for it to work. I think that Black people in America have a higher stake in that than a lot of other folks, because we have to fight for the right to retain our right to vote without any impediments. With you look at the Voting Act. Why no one else needs the Voting Act to um, ensure those rights. But as far as being a part of this movement, I was I had been taking care of my mother who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so I was basically full time caregiving at the same time that a lot of us felt this democracy was coming apart at the seams, 2012, 2014, and into the 2016 election cycle. And I committed myself at that time to doing whatever I could to make things better. I don't have any grandchildren yet, but when I do, they're going to ask me, what did you do in this moment? And my response is going to be, I gave my entire self to this at this time. This is a critical time. It's a moment that we will not regain. And we have to make a concerted effort as much as we can as individuals and as groups, as coalitions, as neighbors to make things better. I can't express how vital it is that we participate. And if all you can do is check your voter registration and go and vote, do that. I have the time right now in my life to be able to devote myself to this. And so that's what I'm doing. And, look forward to the day that I have
Yes.
grandchildren who are going to ask me,
Yes. Well,
what did you do?
I'm sure you'll impart in your grandchildren what your parents imparted in you, and our country is better off for your involvement. I'll ask you one last question, then we got to run.
Okay.
If if all the work you're doing, the democracy reform work you're doing, comes to pass, and we do have a more open, less of a duopoly, and more independent thinking uh, representatives who put our country before political party. How do you see that specifically? What would be better about our country? How's that going to positively impact the day-to-day lives of people?
Well, the first thing I think about is that we will have a functioning government with elected leaders who work with one another on the problems that the people want them to work on. So they'll be working on our environment, maybe, instead of fighting. They'll be working on incarceration reform. They will be working on public education. They will be working on the things that matter to people in their day-to-day lives. They'll be working on real advances in healthcare. They'll be working on reducing the price of medication. These things that people need in their everyday lives that really are sort of stuck right now at a federal level. We have to get those things unstuck, and
Yes,
we have
indeed.
to have people to work on it.
Yes.
So
Well, yes,
that's my
indeed.
hope.
We do. And it's not a pipe dream, because there's real advances. Anybody in our audience who wants to learn about advances, go to Unite America, learn about the democracy reform. And thank you so much, Lisa. You're an inspiration to our audience, I hope, and I hope they become civically engaged just like you have been for these many years. Thank
You're
you again.
welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thanks, David.